All right. So I'm live streaming right now. Gonna see if this is gonna work here. Testing volume. Looking. Stream health is okay. All right. Well, hello everyone. It's Alex once again. And as promised in my previous little preview video that I made in a car, I'm going to talk today about a growing trend that I'm starting to see, especially on Facebook, of coding boot camps targeted to children. What I'll do in this particular video is give parents, now this isn't a comprehensive list that I'm going to talk about today. I'm no expert on the subject. Like I said in the previous video, and if you've watched some of my videos, you know that I am a long-time software engineer, dev. Been doing this for a long time. And so I have an opinion on how this goes. And I also have, my wife and I have 3 children of our own, and 2 of which are in high school. One is about to go into college. And I can only tell you how we approach things as parents, and hopefully what I go over will be informative for those parents who are not in the same job market that I am, or in the same job field that I'm in right now. Let me give you a little bit of backstory here for myself. When I first started out being coding, being a developer, I was a COBOL programmer. Yeah, it's a nasty word for some of us old school guys. And so being a COBOL programmer, I did some really, really repetitive stuff. COBOL is a very A to Z language, very procedural. And so any small little deviation from that procedure could cause you an error, and then you have to start all over again. So, and then I branched into, let's see, what did I branch into first? VB. I started using VB after that. Java, some JavaScript, some VB.net. And then I started branching into C#, a little bit of SQL, some JavaScript, some jQuery, other stuff. And so, excuse me. And so, what happened is, other than COBOL, all of the other languages that I have learned in my 20 plus years of doing engineering as a software engineer or a software developer or an IS analyst or senior IS analyst, everything but one language has been self-taught for the most part. Everything's been just self-taught. I've had to pick it up or I've wanted to learn it on my own. So when I see these boot camps out there, let me say this. We didn't have a ton of boot camps when I was coming up through the ranks of, professionally. Now they seem like they're a dime a dozen. And I've seen some of them, and they charge some very exorbitant fees, and you always want to be wary of that. So let's go over a few things here. And I have a PowerPoint prepared here that I'm going to try to talk about here. So one of the first things that you need to know when you're looking at getting your child involved in software development, because there's a lot of these boot camps that what they do is they try to say, hey, your kids, if you spend all of this money, your kid will be the next Bill Gates or the next Mark Zuckerberg or the next Larry Ellison or the next Steve Jobs. Okay. There's only one of each of those guys. All of those guys are wired a certain way as engineers in their own rights. They all have an arrogant streak to them. uh, especially Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Facebook. He's that one guy who I've met other devs in my time who he reminds me of a lot of guys. The type of guy who's the smartest dude in the room. He knows he's the smartest guy in the room. And if you're not as smart or on the same level as he is, then you're immediately an idiot. Those kind of people have always bothered me. And I know I've met some of those guys, and I've dealt with some of those guys too. So today, again, I'm going to go over a list of things that I've seen. And parents, you want to ask yourself, does this fit or does it not fit my child? Okay. So the first thing that we're going to ask, that you need to ask yourself about your child. The first thing you need to ask yourself about your child is, what kind of thinker is your child? What kind of thinker is your child? How does your child think? You know, is your child a logical thinker? Are they an analytical thinker? Or are they a creative thinker? So you can be a software engineer and a developer being any of these kind of thinkers. However, if you can't grasp logic as a whole, then you're going to struggle as a developer. It's going to take you longer. Well, let me back up. That's not entirely true. If you are more of an analytical thinker, then there could be a type of coding that is geared for you. So, for example, I know a guy who I used to work with, not directly, but I worked with him. I worked with his wife, and smart dude. I mean, just a really, really smart guy, and wife is really smart too. And the guy's an actuary, and he self-taught himself how to use Python, because actuaries use Python because they use a lot of statistics and, you know, and some really, really complex math and stuff. And so Python would help him do his job much better. Well, he self-taught himself. He was driven to self-teach himself how to use a coding language to make his job much easier. He is an analytical thinker because he's analyzing the data that the Python program, the Python scripts that he runs is giving him the information back for. He's analyzing what he's looking at. So he can be an analytical thinker. Analytical thinkers don't always make the best game developers. They're more creative thinkers. I'm not a creative thinker. I'm a logical thinker, and that's just the way I am. And so you have to be very careful when you're trying to enroll your child in a boot camp and you don't know what kind of thinker your child is, especially at such a young age, because I wasn't always a logical thinker. I was more of a creative thinker in my youth. And then when I got older, I became more of a logical thinker and an analytical thinker at times. I'm more of a logical thinker though. So you have to know, what kind of thinker is your child? How does your child think? If they are a logical or an analytical thinker, they may not be the best the next Bill Gates or the next, Larry Ellison or the next Zuckerberg, And so you have to be careful when you're trying to force your child into a type of thought process. You don't want to do that. It's the same issue that we have in today's school system. The school system is trying to force square pegs into round holes. Some kids are square pegs. Some kids are diamonds or triangles. Some kids are round cylinders. You can't force them all into the same box. So you have to be very, very wary when you're trying to push your child into learning code. Now, don't get it twisted. Learning code is an awesome head start into some things. but you have to be very careful, especially when you're spending money for it. Okay, so the next question to ask is your kid an ideological thinker? Do they think ideologically of, okay, what's best for the person who's using this code? Client facing, are they a client first kind of a thinker? Okay. Next, what kind of problem solving skills does your child have? Does your child solve puzzles? How do they solve puzzles? Do they look at all of the pieces and organize the pieces in the squares and get the edges first and then work their way inside? Or do they just try to force pieces on top of one another and do it until it fits? So that helps, along with how they analyze things, to know what kind of a problem solving skill they have. If they have the kind of problem solving skills that they need to be good devs, then they'll have those kind of problem solving skills. Are they easily frustrated? If your child is easily frustrated, you probably don't want to get them involved in coding, because if a child is, I've seen grown people. I've seen grown people, and I've been there myself too at times. I've seen fully grown individuals get so frustrated that they've gotten up from their computers and they have walked out the door. I saw a guy. This guy had a doctorate degree. He lasted all of 5 days as a developer. 5 days as a developer. And he was done. He was like, I can't do this anymore. This is not for me. And so if you're easily frustrated in solving problems, if you are a person who is hair on fire when things aren't going well, might not be the way for you. You have to think very solidly and logically under pressure. You have to be willing to say, okay, what's the issue? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Great example. This just happened today. So I got a text message from one of the ladies at my church who runs our screens at our church. And she's like, hey, one of the screens doesn't turn on. You know, we've got a series of screens, you know, that we run at our church. Actually, I'll put in the description the service for today, and you'll see a problem getting solved in real time, actually. But you have to watch the whole service. I'm doing my part, Pastor. Okay, so what I'm talking about is, I got a text, and she said, hey, this one screen is not turning on. I just don't know why. So I get to the church, and I start looking at the setup there, and I'm looking, okay, what's going on? She's like, do you want me to turn this off? It's like, no, we're live streaming. Don't turn anything off. We're live streaming. So I sat back, and I got to thinking about it, and I'm looking at all of the displays of the equipment that's there, and I noticed there's like 5 banks of these little boxes that I think they're like HDMI splitters or something like that. And I'm looking, and they're all lit up, but this one is not lit up. And I'm like, So I tell her, I say, hey, why don't you scoot aside for a second there and let me get under there and see what's going on there. And so I started looking, and sure enough, thing's not plugged up. The plug is out of it. I'm like, what the heck? So I plug this thing in, we reinitialize the screen, and just like that, right in the middle of service, boom, screen pops up. If you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the description of this video to today's service. So you can't be hair on fire, oh my gosh, this Chicken Little, the sky is falling. If you're going to be a software developer or a developer of any kind, you're going to be stressed out. And if your child is one who's easily stressed, it's probably not a good way to go right away. Maybe when they get a little bit more mature, they might be a lot better at it. So is your child easily frustrated? Do they get bored doing the same thing over and over again? When you are writing lines and lines and lines and lines and lines of code, that can be a bit monotonous. I've had some tasks that I've worked on at work that it gets very, very monotonous at times in places. And that's when you're doing a task that is a monotonous part of your coding task. Every coding task, doesn't matter what it is, you're going to have large, big blocks of code that you gotta code, and it's gonna take forever. And that's the dangerous time for most software developers, or, and for most devs. When you're doing a task that's gonna take a while, that is very monotonous. You're like, oh gosh, I just want this to be so over. That's the most dangerous time, especially for kiddos, because they're easily distracted at times. And if you're easily distracted doing repetitive things, you have to be very careful in introducing them to this kind of a lifestyle so early on. Like I said, the older you get, the more you know how to manage your time better. And so you have to be very careful at when you are introducing this to the kiddos. Are they bored doing the same thing over and over again? Copy, paste, rinse, repeat, that kind of stuff. Are they, how's their focus? That kind of goes with the previous two, right? If a child's focus is just not the best, if they have problems focusing in solving a problem, then you might think twice about it. I've tried to solve a Rubik's Cube. About halfway through, I'm done. It's not to say I can't solve a Rubik's Cube. I've solved Rubik's Cubes before. It's just I'm not like a Will Smith, and I don't have the time. I don't have the patience or the time to do that. But when I'm trying to solve a problem that has to do with my code, then I'm laser focused on trying to figure out what in the heck is going wrong with this thing, and that's the part for me that I love about it, is solving that issue, solving whatever the problem is. And when I come out on the other side, I'm like, yes, I solved it and I learned it, and boom, take that problem. So if you have a child who has problems focusing, and again, you as a parent have to be extremely honest about your child. Like I said, my wife and I have 3 kids, and all 3 of them are totally different. Our eldest is exceptional at staying on task, A to Z, widget A, widget B, widget C, putting stuff, she's great at that. She's an analytical thinker. That's just her. When it comes to thinking outside the box, however, that's not her strength. Our middle child is a lot more like me, but when I was that age, I had trouble focusing on things that were monotonous and, solving problems. I had to learn that skill the older I got. And so in our youngest, she's 4, so, the world is her oyster at 4. So, so again, you have to be very careful in introducing kids to something that's going to frustrate them so early on. And the other danger of this, while I talk about this real quick in this problem solving skills part, this is the one part of development and being a dev of any kind that turns people off from learning how to code. It's one of the number one places that people just go, I'm done. They don't want to solve the easy problems, and they're like, exit stage left. I don't want to do it anymore. Our 18-year-old, she just turned 18. Our 18-year-old, she's going to be going to college in the fall for engineering. And in her freshman year of high school, she took a robotics class, and the second half of the class was coding. And she despised it. I mean, she just hated it. And it steered her away from doing that kind of engineering into the kind of engineering she wants to do. now that she's going to be going to school for in the fall. So if you're, again, if your child has problems focusing, if they're easily frustrated, if they get bored doing the same thing over and over again, you might want to think otherwise and maybe introduce this to them when they're much later and when they're a little older. Next thing, again, do they get easily frustrated when a problem happens? Like I said, I've gotten texts. I've had to walk away from a problem because it's just gotten so frustrating. Very rarely for myself, but everybody's wired differently. I'm that kind of individual that's like, look, this is not going to beat me. I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to solve this problem. Come heck or high water, I'm going to do it and it's not going to beat me. That's just me personally. And everybody's got a level or a line in the sand that they don't want to cross, or that they don't cross, or they choose not to cross, or they don't want to have to cross. When you get to that line of sand where you're trying to solve a problem and it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and you're trying to figure out what is going on, why is this not working? You don't want to be, a 6 or 7 or 8 year old, and there's something that you're just not equipped mentally to understand at such an early age. And most kids get very easily frustrated when they can't figure something out. So you have to be very careful, again, introducing them to these different things. So are they easily frustrated? What are their communication skills like? So one of the things that any software or any engineer or any dev needs to be able to do, you have to be able to take what you do and turn it into human speech. What do I mean by that? Okay, so one again, I said earlier that I'm not a big fan of Mark Zuckerberg. The guy's smart as a whip. I mean, obviously he's a genius, but he's arrogant, in my honest opinion. Watch him try to explain what he does as a developer, as an engineer, to a bunch of older, I should say, more seasoned individuals that are sitting when he got called up to Congress. It's part funny because he's trying to parse his words in a way that he understand that they understand what he's talking about, and they still don't grasp it. If I try to describe what I do to individuals that I go to, like family members and stuff like that, it's over their head. And it can be frustrating. Again, earlier, like I talked about, being frustrated. It can be frustrating when you're trying to communicate a problem to people who are not equipped to understand what you're working on and what you're doing. And that can bring more frustration, especially to a child. One of my pastor and his wives, their youngest daughter, she's I think 11 or 12, and she's into Scratch programming. And every time I see her, I'm trying to encourage her to continue to keep going down that path because she's got a gift for it, and I'm proud of her. And so it's funny because I can tell that when she's talking to me about it, she's very excited because I understand what she's talking about. But when she's talking to other people in the family, some may understand a little bit here and there, but it's like it goes in one ear and not the other. And that could be frustrating at such an early age because you're very eager to show your loved ones in your family what you're doing and how much you care for it. And then you want them to care as much as you care, but they don't understand what you're working on. So it's very frustrating to try to, it can be very frustrating at times to try to vocalize what you're doing and what you need and the things that you like to get accomplished. So what is your child's how are your child's communication skills? What are they like? How did I stutter over my own self here? Do they have the ability to learn quickly, and can they grasp concepts quickly? This is extremely, 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 extremely important to be any kind of developer. If you have a company that is investing time and money and patience to a certain extent and allowing you to learn how to do what you do and to get better at what you do, then they're going to want at some point in time, rather quickly, a return on their investment. They're gonna want ROI, and when you're talking about a child, as parents, we tend to drive our children to want success for themselves. And so when you're a parent and you're dishing out tons of money to a coding boot camp for a kid, you want to see some progress. Well, you won't. How do you know what progress is like if you're not a developer? That's unfair to your child. Now, that being said, if your child has an inability to learn quickly and to grasp some concepts, for example, if they don't know what abstraction, polymorphism, encapsulation, and inheritance is in object-oriented programming, and how that applies to object-oriented programming and to code, they're gonna struggle. And I'm telling you, I know grown people who struggle with the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming, or the solid principles, or there are people who have been doing this for years. There's times where I get a little frustrated at stuff that I don't quite understand, and anybody that says that they understand it all just because they've been in it a long time doesn't mean a thing. Does not mean a thing. Because you're always learning. The technology is always changing. I've written lines of code that in a year's time, I look back and I'm like, what in the world were you thinking? Because I've learned things, and I can go back and try to reapply what I've learned to make my old code better. We call that refactoring. And so if your child has the ability to learn quickly and grasp concepts, they'll be well served in this kind of a realm. If not, you don't want the worst thing in the world is to try to teach a young person a concept that has to do with engineering or development, coding, and they just don't get it. And no matter how you try this way, you try that way to explain it to them, and they just don't get it. And that's because, and that's where you as a parent can get frustrated, because you're not equipped to help them. The person that you're paying may not be equipped to help them either. Safe to say, sorry to say, it's just, that's true. We'll get into that in a minute here. So then the ability to learn quickly and grasp concepts, it's important that they learn it, but they have to grasp it and they have to retain it. Because if they don't retain it and they don't learn it, then they're going to struggle. Thought I heard my heater trying to cut on. Okay. Next, what is their time and task management like? Do they have problems staying on task? Do they complete their tasks in a timely manner? How are they with deadlines? If you tell them to clean up their room, does it take 5 hours for them to clean up their room? If they're that kind of kid, you might not want to get them in this, because coding boot camps are very aggressive in the time that they're going to get kids involved in this. I'm going to I'm gonna wait here a minute here. See if my heater is messed up here. Hold on 1 second here. It's kind of weird there. Okay. So what is their time and task management like? Do they have problems managing their time well? Software developers, programmers, engineers, you're going to have a lot of time to yourself to do your job. And you're going to be trusted to get the job done. The one thing that IT managers and directors and people in charge of developers dislike is having to babysit developers. If I give you a task, or give you a series of tasks, I expect it to be done. If you are a parent and you're spending that kind of money, you expect your kid to be working on code at certain times, not all the time, certain times, and not playing PlayStation or Xbox or whatever. If the kid is learning quickly and they're doing everything that they're supposed to do and they're grasping everything like they should and they've got time for that, well, that's all fine and dandy. But when you're dropping hundreds and thousands of dollars on a coding boot camp, you're not trying to hear PlayStation and Xbox and all that kind of stuff. You want that kid to be, giving you an ROI, return on your investment. So if your kid has problems with time management, then you might think otherwise. What is their passion? Are they passionate about this? The young lady that I was talking about earlier, a pastor's daughter, she's extremely passionate about coding. She loves it to no extent. She loves it. If you don't like what you do, if you don't like what you're doing, then this is not the way to go. If your child does not like coding, figuring problems out, solving problems, talking about what they do, then they're not going to like coding. They're just not going to like it, and you're going to be wasting your money. Finally, is your kid adaptable? Quite often, the way to solve the problem is not the way that the problem starts out. You can have this problem that starts out as a lip chat, and by the time the problem's over, the problem is nothing to do with lip chat, and it's a pin. So you have to be willing, or your child has to be able to adapt on the fly. Your child has to be able to be fluid in their thinking and fluid in how they manage what they're doing. So those are just a few things that you should ask yourself if you want to get your child involved in some kind of a coding boot camp. To me, there are some more positive boot camps out there than others. There's a few really aggressive ones that I kind of scratch my head at and wonder if they're kind of on the up and up. There's one in particular that I'm not going to name, that it is actually there's actually a lawsuit right now about them, and they just happen to be one of the ones that advertises on Facebook quite a bit. So in this particular scenario, all the things we just covered that I covered here, this has to do with before you spend anything, before you think about spending a dime, and wasting money, ask these things, ask these questions about your child, and be honest about your child to yourself. You know, I think that my middle child, she fits a lot of these criteria, but her time and task management, nope. She loses focus on, and I have to be on her. So it's not for her. Not at this time. Now maybe when she gets older, oh yeah, if she can get that time management and the focus thing down, oh she'll be a rock star at this kind of stuff that I do. Eldest, forget it. It's not that they can't do it. They've got the intellect to do it. That's the other thing I want to say real quick is your child, just because your neighbor's child is able to write lines of code and Scratch or whatever, does not make that child any smarter than your child. Don't compare that child to your child. Never do that. Never ever do that. Could code help your child? I don't know. I don't know your child. But I do know that it is dangerous to compare your child to somebody else's child. You know your child better than you know that child. And there's things that you don't see about that child. You're only seeing the outside of what's going on. And in the house, that child could be cheating their way through a boot camp. You never can tell. So that's this video. In the next video, we'll go over a few of these boot camps and look into a few of them to kind of give you an idea of some things. Well, actually, we won't do that. Excuse me. What we'll do in the next video is I'll show you some sites that you can go to free of charge where you can start your kid or your children on coding, and some things that you can download and some things that you can bring in free of charge to start learning how to do some of the things that you're seeing on Facebook, and it won't cost you a dime. It won't cost you a dime. So until the next video, God bless you, and stay healthy and safe and warm, and hope this